Episodes of people who remembered their past lives are always very fascinating to hear, and such instances have been reported from many regions and cultures around the world. In the Western world, one of the most famous past life remembrance episodes is that of Anne Frank. Anne Frank was one of the most famous Holocaust victims. Along with her family members, she stayed in the attic of their shop, hiding from the Nazis from the year 1942 to 44. Finally, the family was found out and taken to the gas chambers of the concentration camps, where Anne Frank died in the year 1945. However, she became famous not merely as a Holocaust victim, but because of the book she wrote of the 2 years that she had resided in the attic of the house. That was such a tremendous portrayal of a little child as she experienced the prejudice amongst humankind and the sentiment of hatred. This diary of Anne Frank subsequently became famous as one of the most popular books around the world and has been translated into 70 languages. Interestingly, Anne Frank died in the year 1945, and less than 10 years later, in 1954, a little girl called Barbro Karlen was born in Sweden. When she was just 3 years old, she told her parents that she was not Barbro Karlen but Anne Frank. The parents had never heard of who Anne Frank was. And she would have hallucinations of uniformed soldiers running up the stairs to the attic, which were inexplicable to the parents. Interestingly, again, for the 2 years that Anne Frank's family had been holed up in the attic, they had eaten only beans. And Barbro Karlen just hated beans and could not consume them. Her fear of policemen was so much that to overcome it, subsequently when she grew up, she joined the Swedish mounted police and served there for 10 years. An interesting episode happened when she was 8 years old. By then, the diary of Anne Frank had become famous, and she heard her teacher talking about Anne Frank. That astonished her. She said, how does she know Anne Frank? And then Barbro Karlen came to realize that Anne Frank was a famous personality. When she became 10 years old, her father took the family for a tour of Europe. And they also reached Amsterdam, where Anne Frank's previous home had now been turned into a museum called the Anne Frank House. And her father had also come to know of this personality and wanted the family to visit. So he was thinking of calling a taxi to the hotel. But Barbro Karlen said there will be no need, it's just a few blocks away. And she led the family walking to the house. When she went there, she could easily point out aspects of the house that had been changed. And the guide concurred with what she said. Now, the beautiful part is that Anne Frank, although a little girl, had harbored the ambition of being a world-famous writer, which she did become posthumously. That talent for writing continued in Barbro Karlen, and at the age of 12, she wrote a book that got noticed by literary agents, and it was published and became the most well-sold book in Swedish publishing history till then. Subsequently, through her teen years, she published 9 books. Now, how do you explain Barbro Carlén having this kind of link with Anne Frank, except when we accept the eternality of the soul? Let me read about it to you from my latest book, Spiritual Secrets from Hinduism. On accepting the idea of rebirth, the question arises, why do we all not remember our past lives? The answer is that death is very painful for the soul. Death erases most memories of the life gone by. Furthermore, birth is an even more painful experience, which wipes out remaining recollections of the previous life. The soul, nevertheless, does retain a faint remembrance in infancy. The Nyaya Darshan states, Jatasya harsha shoka bhaya sampratipataha. If you observe a little baby, you will find it occasionally becomes fearful without any obvious reason. Likewise, it becomes happy or begins to cry without a visible cause. The Nyaya Darshan explains that this is because it is a recalling events of past lives and reliving those feelings. As the baby grows older, impressions of this life leave a strong imprint and eventually obscure the fainter impressions of past lives. Nevertheless, this rule does have exceptions. There are accounts of people around the world who have had vivid recollections of their previous life. Their statements about their past birth have been examined by scientists and confirmed as true. The famous example of Shanti Devi, who died as Lugdi Devi in 1925 in Mathura and was reborn in Delhi in 1926, was one such case validated by a high-profile team.